I'd like to introduce our panelists. Roger Thomas is a section leader in the Patrick Center for Environmental Science at the Academy of Natural Sciences, and he's the operations manager for Drexel's Biodiversity, Earth, and Environmental Science Department, which is called BEES and might get a little confusing today. We'll try to separate the two. He has more than 40 years of experience in environmental monitoring, project development, management, and outreach. Like many of us at the Academy, Roger enjoys being outdoors, hiking, biking, and bird watching, but he's also an avid beekeeper, which is what made us so excited that he's joining us for this event. He also enjoys woodworking, and I think we'll get to see a bit of that today from Roger. Chris Sotha is a trailblazer in environmental activism. She is a trail ambassador for Friends of the Wissahickon, a Pennsylvania master naturalist, and a Philadelphia Parks and Recreation Commissioner. She leads efforts to promote public participation in conservation and environmental justice to help remediate the effects of climate change. We're so happy to welcome you today, Chris, to talk to us about the actions everyone here can take to better the environment around them. So let's get into this conversation and learn how bee hotels and bat houses are among the small actions that spark a big change, especially for pollinators. If you've joined us for the previous Spark Change events, you know we've talked a lot about biodiversity and why it's so important. But today we want to focus specifically on pollinators, those we know like bees and butterflies, but also those that we may not consider like bats and hummingbirds. So Roger, I know these are big questions, but can you give us an idea of what the current situation in and around Philadelphia looks like concerning pollinators, and why should we be concerned about pollinator numbers? I'm going to stop sharing my screen here because I think you'd like to share yours, correct?
Yes, welcome everybody. Let me share my screen here. We'll talk a little bit about pollinators. Everybody see that? So my talk today is entitled, Help Save the Pollinators. So you may ask, well, what exactly are pollinators? You know, does anyone have any idea what pollinators are? Here's 5 examples of some of the more common pollinators. 3 of them you might readily recognize, like the monarch and this hummingbird moth and one of my little honeybees in the middle, and a ruby-throated hummingbird, and a small mammal. You wouldn't think of small mammals as pollinators, but yes, they do indeed. They are responsible for pollinating many, many, many plants throughout the world. All right. Well, you might ask, well, you know, why are pollinators that important? Why should we care about them? Well, in flower and crop pollination throughout the world, it's hard to believe, but around 35% of all the food crops that you see need pollinators like bees and other insects and small mammals. I know this is a big number, but around 250,000 species of flowering plants that we see depend on pollinators. In your backyard, you know, wild plants, you know, without pollinators, many of those species wouldn't be able to propagate because pollinators help produce seeds, nuts, and berries. And all these things help to support genetic diversity, meaning that over time, there's enough genetic diversity, a mixture of different kinds of traits within these plants that if something were to come along and affect one particular group of plants, that the others would be able to propagate and continue. And that's a very important trait. And for me, you know, a food source, pollinators are incredibly important. We get quite a bit of honey. I'm a beekeeper, and this year we got almost 8 gallons of honey from 2 different collections, one in the spring and one in the fall. And something you may not think about, but you know, bees are also part of the food chain. You know, there's lots of birds and spiders and insects. I didn't bring it, but the praying mantises like to crawl up on top of my hives and just waiting there for a bee to come by for lunch. And lots of pollinators are responsible for, diversifying wildlife habitats. You see bees and other insects, they drill holes, they gather together small organic material. And all these little microhabitats are incredibly important for other insects and other small animals. And then in a big picture, in terms of biodiversity, you know, pollinators, including bees and insects, contribute to this interconnected ecosystems that we at the Academy like to study all around the world. Well, what kind of threats are there locally to pollinators? Um, I like to think of the biggest being habitat loss and fragmentation uh, due to land development and even things like fracking. People don't realize that not only when fracking is being developed in the Susquehanna drainage and potentially in the Delaware drainage, that they put down well pads, but they also put down interconnector um, pipes that require clear cutting swaths through forests, and that promotes fragmentation. And when habitats like that are fragmented and clear cut, they're open up to sunlight, and invasives and other less desirable plants take advantage of those disturbed habitats. Things like pesticides. Bees are particularly affected by pesticides. Um, Invasive species like, I don't know how many of you know, Japanese knotweed, for example, just dominate the landscape. Whenever you see a large plot of Japanese knotweed, that's generally all you see because they grow so quickly and they shade out other plants. Things like climate change, changing temperatures, decrease some favorable habitats for many pollinators. And then obviously things like pollution and diseases. I know in our bees and bees in general in North America, that we worry about what's known as a colony collapse disorder um, carried by parasitic mites. In fact, just the other day, I had to apply some dilute oxalic acid wood bleach that helps to knock back the mites in our bees before they try to make it through the winter. And if you don't do that, the mites sap the strength of many of the bees, and they don't survive the long winter. Well, like I was saying, bees are common local pollinators. Here you see examples of three of them. But bees can be solitary or social, meaning like in the upper right, social honeybees. Honeybees are social insects, but most bees are solitary, like a mason or carpenter bees that don't require a large community to survive. So you may want to ask, well, what can I do to help promote pollinators and bees in general? Well, let's take a look. So here we are traveling up to Harleysville, up to our place, and there's three of our hives. If I took a picture now, they'd be all wrapped up in plastic and bedded down for the upcoming storm that's about to hit, all snug, and hopefully they'll make it through the winter. There I am with a good frame of bees. This is a very, very successful hive. We've gotten quite a bit of honey out of it, and the bees are doing very well. We treat for mites twice a year and practice several different pest management strategies to help promote healthy colonies, and they seem to be doing very well. And if you have the space and the time, you can give a shot at raising honeybees. Philadelphia County, Montgomery County, and Bucks County each have very large beekeeping societies and beekeeping clubs. They have meetings generally once a month, and I belong to the Montgomery County Club, and there it's a wonderful group, and they provide beginner beekeeping classes. It's amazing how many people keep bees in Montgomery County and in Philadelphia County, how many people keep bees on the rooftops. So, one of the things that we like to get, not only the pollinators and the advantage of having them promote and pollinate lots of the crops that we grow. We have a very large garden and several different fruit trees and berry bushes that the bees love to pollinate. But we get quite a bit of honey too. But you can also build a bee hotel. This is the kind of bee hotel I'd like to run sometime. Well, exactly how would we go about doing that? It depends on how ambitious you'd like to be. This is one of the incredible designs that we found. This is probably 10 foot across and 8 foot high. And you can see the wide variety of different design types and kinds of little holes that the solitary bees take advantage of. You can be more modest like this. Basically, one design, one hole, prompting a specific group of solitary bees to take advantage of. And this is one of my favorites. This is what I call I can make this in an hour solitary bee hotel. It's just a soda bottle with both ends clipped off and a bunch of bamboo, and it's got some twine hanging from the wall, and you're ready to go. So it doesn't have to be really complicated. The idea is to get out there and give it a try and see what kinds of solitary bees you can attract. It's an incredible amount of fun, and you can't believe how many different kinds of solitary bees that you'll attract given these kinds of little microhabitats and protected areas for them to take advantage of. But here's a good example of a solitary bee. They lay their eggs in these small holes. They make a mud door, frequently covered with vegetation, and after the bee hatches from the egg inside, it'll eat a small amount of pollen that's stored in the tube and gets large enough until it can break through its little mud door and fly away. And it's really interesting to see them develop and chew their way out. So how exactly did I go about doing this? Well, I've never tried doing this before. I've got a small shop and some friends who have lots of bamboo. They were readily volunteering for me to come and get. So these are about 15-inch lengths of bamboo. And you try to pick stems that have a 3/32 to a ½ inch hole diameter. What that does is it promotes different kinds of solitary bees, different sizes, and they'll take advantage of the hole size that best fits their body and its requirements for minimally closing up the hole. So they don't want to waste more effort on generating a mud door than they have to. And I had some scrap cedar lying around. So, after looking through the internet, it's easy to find a couple of really interesting designs. And a day or two later, there we go. It's nothing complicated. Just has a large overhanging roof to keep the rain out. And again, it's just a couple nails and a little glue, and you can see it's nothing. It's not fine furniture. It doesn't need to be. It just needs to be something that's relatively watertight and sturdy, and can hold your bamboo. So once you fill it with bamboo, you're ready to go. You can hang it in the spring and take some photographs while it's out there during the spring and summer, and you'd be amazed on what you'll see.
I'm sorry, Roger.
Sure.
I'm going to interrupt for 1 second while you're still on that topic. Tony had a great question. If you create this, where's the best location on your property to hang it?
Generally, someplace like a south-facing area that doesn't get affected by lots of wind and rain. Yeah, those are generally good things to think about when you try to site your any kind of like I have our beehives, a good south-facing slope and an area that doesn't see a lot of wind, something that's kind of protected.
Great, thank you. And
Sure.
I think we have a lot of people here who are interested in building one of these. In yours here, is there a back to the house or
Yes.
is it open in the back?
Mm-hmm.
The back.
As a back, and the other thing about bamboo, which is really interesting, is that it's in. If you've ever held bamboo or cut it, it has these nodes, which are, I'm not a botanist, but they're basically areas that have a chamber or a closed element to it, and you only have to cut one end of it because the other end has, you can see these little these little nodes. They're solid. They go right through from one side of the bamboo to the other. So all you have to do is cut the one end of it. And what that does is you'd have to seal it anyway if you use something like Phragmites or straw, because you don't want potential parasites coming in from that direction. So when I sought the material for doing this, a lot of people use bamboo, and now I can see why, because it's relatively easy to cut. Like I said, and it's not too difficult to get 12 to 15 inch lengths once you cut it. And there's a certain amount of maintenance too. This is something that requires a little bit of maintenance during the season and after the season's over, because sometimes the individual tubes get clogged, or some of the material stays within the tube, and you get a longer pair of forceps, or you try to clean everything out. And these aren't glued in; they're just press fit in, so that when I go to clean this at the end of next season, I'll be able to take each one of these tubes out and clean them individually, and then I'll probably freeze them. And then in the following spring, I'll just reload this again, and it'll be clean and ready to go, parasite free.
Perfect. And I think you answered some questions Owen had there about cleaning it out. So that's great. One more from Ryan. What tools do you use to cut the bamboo that you've used there?
I just used a hand saw.
Great.
Yeah, it doesn't require powered shop tools or anything. You can use a hacksaw or a small hand saw. It cuts very well.
Perfect. All right. Sorry for interrupting, but
oh no, glad.
Yeah, no. I'm so glad people are really curious about that.
Yeah, we love questions. Love questions.
We have one more before we head on, and sort of like about carpenter bees and how to sort of prevent them from taking up full residence in the bee hotels. And so, Roger, if you have any sort of advice on sort of how do we keep it as a rotating Airbnb status as opposed to a resident home?
Well, we do that by restricting the size of the bamboo that you put in. I mean, carpenter bees generally require greater than 3/8 of an inch. And as you can see on mine, the larger ones don't take up that many. So if you restrict the size and you kind of stay within the 3/32 to a half-inch hole diameter. You should be fine.
And I think Owen had one more like follow-up question on cleaning things out. What time of the season do you, like when do the larvae hatch to make sure you're avoiding cleaning anything out that still needs to get out of there?
Well, I would clean it before you put it away, and that would be in the late fall, early winter. You clean it and then freeze it and then bring it back out in the spring and you'll be ready to go.
Perfect. And that cedar you have there, do you treat it with anything, or you just...
I don't know. This will go gray. I mean, you can. If you go online, I'll have a bunch of references, but I mean, it's wonderful that some of the incredibly detailed hotels that people make. And I'm amazed. And they're painted and they're just gorgeous. This was just, the first stab at making a rudimentary bee hotel for our presentation. But wow, I mean, all you have to do is Google how to make a bee hotel and look at the images. And it's very impressive what people do and how they're committed to this cause. And it's a lot of fun. And it's a great conversation piece too. When people come over and they go, what the heck is that? And then you tell them about solitary bees and they go, what kind of bees? And then you get to explain like, well, honeybees aren't the only bees, most bees are solitary. But anyway, it's fun.
It's a great point. You're promoting, protecting bees in several different ways. So that's great.
Yeah, we enjoy it. So that's two ways we could do it and help promote pollinators. Some other things, I don't know how many of you, we have a little bit of land here in Harleysville, and in our fence row in some of the areas we like to leave go wild and just see what comes up. And that's one of the interesting things about being a wildlife gardener. You can add things that are specific to some butterflies and bees. Like milkweed, and then some things you could just let go natural and see what kinds of things you can attract. And there's all kinds of natives that will volunteer if the ground isn't constantly mowed. And frequently, lots of them are plants that pollinators will feed on in different life stages, both as larvae and as adults. I like to think about giving bees nesting places, things like piling up stems and leaves, and instead of bagging them up, we'll put them in, and we have a fence row. So in where I grew up, I mean, when you have a fence row, you kind of let it go, and that's where you put your Christmas tree and all kinds of things that promote microhabitats for small mammals. And again, like I mentioned, avoiding pesticides. And again, milkweed is an incredible plant for a variety of pollinators. And in this region, Adopt a Monarch, there's many programs where you can get on board and help sponsor a monarch on its portion of its migration to Mexico. And again, grasslands are incredibly important. Oftentimes we'll cut only once every couple months certain areas to try to promote more grasses. And it's something that a lot of people don't think about, but I know when we have our bees out that in the summertime, it's incredibly important to provide some water. I know it's not something most people think about, but pollinators, including bees, do get thirsty. So I hope that gives you an introduction to bees, and including solitary bees, and building and managing bee hotels. Here's a group of references if you want to take a screenshot, or we can provide this to anyone who puts a note in the chat. But these are some wonderful websites that give you some insight into solitary bees and can get you started on thinking about building your own bee hotels. I know it was a fun project for me, and I'm thinking about building a few more.
And I'll just note here that everyone who registered and is here today, and those who registered and couldn't join us, we'll be sending out the recording of the event tomorrow, and we'll be sure to include all of these resources as links. That way, if there's something useful here, you can just click right through and find out how to do these things.
Super. Again, thanks for my portion of this incredible program about pollinators, and we'll be monitoring the chat, and I'll pass to Chris, and let's learn a little bit about bat houses.
Yeah, great. As we pass it over to you, Chris, I will share my screen here. And, uh-oh, where'd my screen go? Here we go. Can you see it there, Chris?
Yes, I can.
Great. So I would love for you to tell us, what Friends of the Wissahickon has been doing to protect bats and why you find that important, and just tell us a little bit about your efforts there.
I would love to. Thank you. Thank you so much for having us. And Roger, I just loved your bee houses. And like I said this before we started, I really love the adapted reuse of using the Pepsi bottle, I guess, and then found materials. And I just have one quick question. If I set up a bee house like that, will it lure my carpenter bees to a remote location instead of facing on the back of my house? So I'd like to give them another opportunity to relocate to a classic hotel off-site.
It's been my experience that carpenter bees, once they found a particularly delicious part of your estate, that they tend to go back there. That's just my experience.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that, but oh well, I thought I found a good solution. So Friends of the Wissahickon, as most of you probably know, is one of the biggest friends groups in the Parks and Recreation system. And I'm a trail ambassador, which means that I teach different programs for Friends of the Wissahickon in the Wissahickon Valley Park, which is a 10,000 acre park with a 7-mile ribbon trail in a steep gorge, and it's the first national natural landmark in the United States. It's very beautiful. So one thing we like to do there is have bat night, and it's a partnership with the Parks and Rec at the Tree House, if you've been there, and Andorra Free Library. So here's some folks out on the deck before we walk up in the dark up to the Andorra Meadow. We're going to look for bats. So we can show the next slide. And if you haven't been to this park, I see no reason to drive to Maine or Vermont. Of course I do, I love it there, but can you see this beautiful vista? And this is a restored meadow habitat, a grasslands habitat. Just like Roger was saying, one of the things that pollinators need is more grasslands, and that's a fastest growing habitat, we're losing more grasslands than anything else in the country. So we're excited about this. And there's a butterfly habitat here, and we do butterfly walks, we do moth night, and bat night. So on the right, if you take a look at this little device called a bat seeker, it's extremely cool. It reads the ultrasonic chirps that bats make when they talk to each other and look for food with their echolocation. You probably know this from 7th grade science, right? That humans adapted sonar from the sound that a bat sends out to get a reflected sound so it can tell where things are. So what happens at night, we walk up to the field and turn on the different devices. And as the bat comes towards its food overhead, it goes dee, 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 dee. And like when they strike their moth or their mosquito, it makes a little sparking sound. And it's really fun for the kids. And this would make a nice holiday gift if any of the families out there want to do build some bee houses or build some bat houses and go outside and look for these animals. We have the next slide. So do-it-yourself bat house. Not everyone is as clever as Roger. So I forgot to get a wood shop in my house. And yet when we were kids, my brother was the Eagle Scout and he built our family a bat house that looked very similar to the one in the middle right here. And we didn't place it on the building, we placed it in the wrong location. So I'm not sure how many bats we had. Then he made me another one and I put it in our yard here, and we've had many bats over the years. So the FOW, Friends of the Wissahickon, really likes this batconservation.org plans for do-it-yourself bat houses. But like just like Roger said, you can just ask Siri, how do you make a bat house? And there's endless opportunities to look for different options. So let me show you this. Here's a problem that this is a purchased bat house that I got. I thought that would make a nice gift for me. So my husband got it for the holidays. But can you see the roof? This does not work as a flat roof because you really want to pitch. So otherwise it will rot the house and you'll have to climb back up. And it's also scored on the top, which isn't good. Here's another little problem. This is too big a space for the bats, and we need a predator guard because other predators love to eat a delicious, juicy bat while they're sleeping during the day. So also lots of different bat houses put metal mesh right here, and we don't need metal because the bats can climb on wood, which is a little bit better and safer for them. So you can show the next slide, please. So the best bat houses have large chambers, but they have a nice grip, but a predator guard, which could be just a 2x4-inch square of wood that you could put in. You have to have ventilation because the bat houses should be put in a place where they get sunlight. But if it's too hot, and you know with climate change, it's getting pretty warm around here, they have to be able to climb down in the house to a cooler area, so it has to have a small vent in it, and then it has to be sealed, like because we're having a storm tomorrow. So the bat houses that are up in the Wissahickon are sealed so the bats will be toasty. And high quality, just as Roger used cedar on his, that's what we recommend. And then of course this is our premier site. And where do we put the bat house? This is a big problem. People always complain, I have a bat house and it's empty. So if there's no bats in your bat house after 2 years, then it's time to relocate it. But here's the different things we can do. It works out best on the side of a building, but you have to get 6 hours or more of sun a day. So if it's like, for example, people put them up in trees, so then there's a couple problems. Number one, nothing loves a delicious, juicy bat more than an owl. So if you put it in the tree, it's kind of like an owl buffet, which is dangerous for the bats, right? And also the tree is usually shaded, and the bat needs to have at least 10 or 12 feet because they come out of their house and they drop down head first, of course, and they have to have an area to open their wings and swoop. So you can't have shrubbery, rose bushes, vehicles, or all kinds of things there. So what do we like people to do is get a 4x4 post or metal and place it far enough away from the house, 20 feet away from trees and houses work as well. Okay, next slide. Oh, here's the landing pad, yeah. So remember I was showing you this part right here. This is the landing pad. So the bats come in at pretty high speed, as you can imagine, and this is where they land and climb up. So the air vents are there, the chamber pad. Sometimes there's 2 chambers. Like, see this could have been a double, which would be interesting because it would have to be a little bit wider. But if there's 2 chambers, that's helpful if there's a big colony there, because mostly the females roost in there with their pups. Let's see, and the gripping edges have to go all the way up. And of course, when you build your bat house, or before you go outside, you would put some cleats on the back and string it more like, you're gonna need some wire I don't like driving nails into trees, but take a look at your site, because if there's high wind, it'll shake and tear off the tree, and that won't be good. So the more secure you place it, the better. All right, next slide, please. So you were talking about how there's predators that come to that wait, like the praying mantis, Roger, waits outside of the bee house. So I have the same problem when I do moth night. I use a moth trap here, which is ultraviolet light. And then, as you can see, this catbird is waiting there. Because in the morning, there's nothing a catbird likes better, because they're buggers, as you bird people know. So the catbirds one time actually dove into the moth box there. But there's so many different pollinators that we want to protect: bees, moths, bats, and butterflies, right? And just like Roger was saying, bees are a food source for other things, right? And moths are a food source. They're a nocturnal flying pollinator, and bats eat them at night, right? And butterflies are a food source for birds that fly during the day. And their caterpillars, both the caterpillars for moths and butterflies, are a delicious source for all birds and lots of other animals. Okay, next slide. Oh wait, before I go back, go back just one, I'm sorry. So if you create a little garden, you can build a garden and create a habitat for pollinators in as small a thing as a little pot and put it on your front steps, right? If you plant it carefully. Or you can restore several acres and organize the community and work on public or private land. So we have lots of opportunities for that in the Wissahickon. Okay, next slide. Here is an image of an insect that looks like a hummingbird. So this is another pollinator, and both the hummingbird moth, which is what this is, and a hummingbird are both pollinators. And this is a diurnal day-flying moth. You might have seen these if you're in a garden with tubular flowers. If a hummingbird visits the plant, then a hummingbird moth will also visit it. Thank you. Next slide. So when you make your garden, first of all, I'm giving you permission to stop cleaning up the garden and manicuring it. I give butterfly walks and talks, and I'm not an expert birder, but I do bird walks and moth night and habitat and blah, blah, blah. So I noticed, I went to the Kew Gardens in London, where Her Majesty has her very beautiful gardens. There was not one butterfly anywhere to be seen, because everything is manicured, totally scraped clean underneath every shrub and mulched with like dead material. So if you want to have a habitat for pollinators, like Roger said, stop mowing everything down to the ground and taking the leaves off your property. Because if you can look at this image, this is where a lot of cocoons and chrysalises are, all in these bags. So what I recommend people do is they underplant their shrubs with a different native plant rather than going to a big box store and getting mulch, because you're breaking up this beautiful habitat. So the best way to make a pollinator garden, I recommend going outside on your property when it's raining to see where the water goes. And the Academy had this beautiful rain garden spark change. Wasn't that your last one that you did, Kate? Right, yeah. So you could review that for some ideas, because that means no watering, right? So I'm lazy by nature, so I would always choose plants, and I recommend that you do this. Do research, see what your property looks like, see where you'd like to do a pollinator garden, and do some planning. How much sun do you get? Do you get a lot of wind? How much do you want to water? You don't want to be adding all these irrigation issues if you plant drought-tolerant shade plants. If you have a dry property and a lot of shade, problem solved. You'll have a lot easier time. So these just are directions you can get anywhere, and you may take classes in many, many places to learn how to garden if you're not sure how to get started. So next slide, please. But I recommend you do as much research as possible ahead of time. Here's some of the native plants that are favorites of the big flying insects that we love, the moss and the butterflies. You may know that if you have a garden and you enjoy watching butterflies in it, and you've planted some of these beautiful native flowers, at night, 10 times more moths fly in your garden than butterflies. So that's another thing to think about. Thank you. Next slide. So we would love you to plant native plants because they're less work, they're more nutritious for everyone, and they belong in our climate. It's very tempting to go to some of the garden centers where there's hybrids and all kinds of gorgeous, plants from other countries, but your garden will do better, and it'll be a favor that you're doing for our ecosystem if you use native plants. And then you want to mulch, or this would be mulching with your own leaves, not buying bags of mulch. Or I'm suggesting you underplant underneath your shrubs or trees. And then they're saying water every other day, blah, blah, blah. But I guess the main message I want to give you is do your research on your site. And then there's so many things available now where you can get all kinds of information. And you plant things in drips, which makes it easier for example, for monarchs and butterflies to fly in. If you have one, like a yellow, an orange, and a red plant in single areas, it's not so easy for the female to recognize it. So you would plant, several of each color, which makes it more dramatic and more interesting. Also, here's a pro tip. If you have a property where you want to enjoy looking at your garden from your house, go in your house and look out the window. So instead of planting things directly in a straight line away from your house, turn it sideways, and for the same amount of time and effort, you can have what appears to be a broader, richer landscape to look at with very little planning. And this is what I do with bulbs also. Bulbs are an easy and fun way to layer things close to the house and moving back, especially the ephemerals. Okay, and 4 seasons, that's the other thing. Oh, thanks. We're good right here. All right, let me show you a few things. If you're going to let part of your yard go natural, as Roger was saying, and we do this here in our property too, sometimes there's ordinances, depending upon where you live, where people don't love to see tall grass, and there's the rules about mowing your yard. You can get around this quite easily if you make your property a habitat. So there's a few places you can do this, and I'm showing you some of the habitat signs that I have. Audubon is a good one, and it also helps teach you as you certify your property, you'll learn about what's necessary to make it a real habitat. And so you can see it's Xerces, Penn State, and Audubon, and of course Wildlife Federation. Okay, next slide, please. So habitat conservation, this is what Friends of the Wissahickon does. And on the right, you can see our stamp on one of our bird houses. So we cite bluebird houses and wood duck houses and lots of other habitat houses all over this the 10,000 acres, including bat houses. And we're doing a partnership with the museum on eco land management. And it's all about monitoring wildlife, including the app eBird, which many of you have heard about for birders, and also the iNaturalist app. Okay, next slide. It's fun to be a citizen science, and it's really fun for kids too. And up in the left side, you see someone using the citizen science app, which is the iNaturalist app. You can just put on your phone, and if you go on FOW.org newsletter, we're going to publish how to do that. And we also lead hikes and walks and talks. On the right, you'll see a map of the park. And then this is my favorite. This is the team hanging the wood duck box up next to the Wissahickon Creek. Okay, next slide. And these are some sources for the gardening, butterfly sites, insects, and Audubon. All right, next slide. And oh, here's our friend. Roger said that our friend Von Shuri is just to finish his PhD project in school, but he and I worked on a moth project, Moth Night, and starting about, I think, 6 years ago when they first started National Moth Week. And we introduced iNaturalist to our folks who came to Moth Night. And then I was really proud to have some of my specimens in the museum. And Roger was saying this is such a fun idea for kids. If kids have a specimen that they'd like to present to the museum, it gives them a chance to be part of one of the world's biggest and most important collections, certainly of insects in the world. Okay, next slide.
I think that's all.
Thank you. Yeah.
So I'll stop sharing here. Chris, I have to say thank you to the Friends of the Wissahickon for those wood duck boxes. I love seeing them on the river. They're so beautiful. But great, we will open things up for questions here. So again, you can place them in the chat by clicking that icon at the bottom, or you can raise your own hand if you would like. You'll do that by clicking the participants panel, and then you'll see the raise hand button there. That'll just let us know that we can unmute you. And all right. And also, Lindsay, do we have any questions come in via Facebook?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. If you are watching on Facebook, feel free to drop something in the comments there if you would like to ask a question. But I do see some here in the chat. Let me catch up here. Sorry. Oh, can you expand on what the problem with mulch is?
Could I? Yeah. Well, if you make your own mulch by shredding leaves, that's different. But if you go to a store and buy, especially dyed mulch, that isn't good for the land. That isn't good for the soil microbiology, for one thing, and we want to keep everything healthy. If it's shredded natural materials, if you compost maybe on your property, you know, it's there's a lot of free places to get compost. That's different than just the pre-made shredded mulch. It's healthier for the plants to have another plant growing underneath it. It saves time, it's more natural, and it provides more habitat. Because don't forget, the insects, the big insects like moths and butterflies, they need foraging host plants for the caterpillars to eat. So it's not just, you're not just planting nectar sources, right? Your garden has to provide some source for the caterpillars too.
Okay. And Sue had a great question. Are there rules for bat box installation in the city? Is there anything we should know about that?
You mean, are there ordinances for public health and license and inspection? I'm not sure about that.
Well, and actually, I'm sorry, I misspoke. She's actually wondering if there's rules about bat box installation in city parks.
Oh, well, I'm not sure why there wouldn't be any. Well, you would not be able to go into a Philadelphia Parks and Recreation City Park and place a bat box without checking with Parks and Rec. But I'm sure that they would be delighted to help with the habitat, especially if it's in a habitat area. You know, I don't know if they want bat boxes in Love Park between the skyscrapers, but you never know. Contact me directly and I'll find out for you if there's whoever this is, if you have a location in mind. I'd love to help you with that.
Sure, yeah. So Sue actually expanded. She's interested in installing one at Howell Park in Germantown. So do you have recommendations of like where she should start to contact the right person?
If that park has a friends group, I would check with them. But if you contact me afterwards, I'll get you in touch with the person.
Great. And anyone who does have those more specific questions that you would like to share with the panelists, you can feel free to email those questions to us at membership@ansp.org. We'll put it in the chat there too, but membership@ansp.org, and we'll make sure we're connecting you to the right people and getting you taken care of there.
I just want to thank that person for that great idea, because It's wonderful. So that's just the kind of participation we want. And if you're going to make that bat house even more, take your bow.
Great. And it looks like I had missed a question here from Dessa. She says, I put up a bat house to help control mosquitoes, but haven't had any takers so far. How do I attract bats to take up residence?
You know, I don't know how long ago you put the bat house up. If it's been more than 2 years, it's because the bats don't like the location. So take a good look after Katie's going to post this information. Take a good look at the specs of the kind of requirements that the bats have for the location. It might be the location. It might be the habitat, right? If the whole area was sprayed with Roundup and there's nothing living there, there's no insects, right? There's no it's not a rich environment with moths and mosquitoes, then bats won't be there, right? So I don't know. If there's spotlights, a lot of people have a lot of light pollution at their house and a lot of floodlights at night, or there could be a street light that disturbs the bats. I'm not exactly sure, but you could experiment. I suggest you move it, and you would move the bat house now, would be not, of course, before a winter storm, but move it before spring, right? If the migratory bats could come back and find it and be delighted.
We had another question kind of relating to that. They ask, is there any benefit or risk of using bat pheromones that can be found online to help attract bats? Would you go the natural route first and then?
Yeah, and I am not aware of, I would check on batconservation.org and check with the bat experts. Okay. I'm a master naturalist and I like getting people excited about putting down their devices and going outside. What are we doing outside, right? And doing these things to help nature, but I'm not sure about the pheromones. I usually don't like that idea because if it's mating season, then you're preventing. First of all, the females roost in the bat boxes. Usually, the males go other places, and they because they're nursing their pups, right? So it could be confusing. Is it a male or a female pheromone? I don't know.
No, that's a great resource, though. Can you tell us that website one more time?
Yeah, before you buy any products like that, you know how things go on the internet. Everything's a miracle. Just send us $19. So keep an eye out for that. Yeah.
Great. Let's see. Oh, here's a great question. Roger, you might be able to answer this. Hornets, I have been stung before, but are hornets pollinators?
They are.
Oh, Roger, I'm sorry, you're on mute.
Some are and some aren't. That's the
Okay.
question, quick answer.
Okay. But in general, many wasps and flying insects like that are pollinators.
Actually, many wasps are carnivores. I mean, they really frequenting lots of flowers. So it depends on the individual insect.
Okay, good to know. All right. And here's one more from Elizabeth. Do the bats overwinter in the boxes or do they go somewhere warmer in the cold weather?
It depends on the species of bat. We have 9 species in Pennsylvania, and they're all microbats, so they're all insect-eating bats, but we don't know if they migrate or not. I mean, it depends. Some of them, some do, some don't. I'm not sure. Is she talking about little brown bats? And, there's a lot of interesting, here's a book I like. You may just get your phone and ask Siri, because you know what I'm saying? There's a lot of ways to look all these things up. So I don't know. I lead bat night up until October, but after that it gets too cold. So they're either roosting in the bat box or they've migrated, or they're roosting naturally underneath the bark or in their little roost. Oh, I have to say something. We know that there's a bat colony in the Wissahickon. And people have reported to me that they see them all flying out. I don't know if anybody's ever been to Austin to the Congress Street Bridge, but we went there and saw 1 million bats flying out at once in the twilight. So we have this in the Wissahickon too. I want to find out where it is and then set up a night where, for bat night where we can observe this. So it's going to be exciting.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, if there are any other questions, feel free, again, drop those in the chat or let us know. But we do have one here.
We have one from Facebook too, Katie.
Oh, great. Lindsay, do you mind?
Chris, can you expand a little bit about how you hang your bat houses? Is it just like with like a picture with a wire?
Yes, and also it depends where you hang it. Right, if you put, the flat picture cleats, if you're putting into a house, Roger would know this better, right? You need a person to help, you need a ladder, you drive, I don't know if you're doing a masonry bit, you have to secure it by figuring it out, right? The main goal, it depends where you put it, right? But you could tie it around something with wire if it's around poles, or if it's on a metal thing that's round, that's one thing, or if it's on a 4x4 or an 8x8 pole, if it's on a wall of a house. There's all different ways to do it. You have to do it so it doesn't shake. That's the main thing, right? It's especially and blow in the wind. Oh, one more thing about the bat houses. If you make your own bat house, please don't paint it with all kinds of horrible paint, because just like now we're not painting bird houses with volatile organic compounds that off gas. We'd certainly never paint the inside. So you would just seal it with a residential grade product so it doesn't rot. Because they don't, unlike, Roger's houses go inside and he sterilizes and cleans them and freezes them, and then they go back outside, right? These stay out in all kinds of weather and they're wet. So if you want to go to the trouble of making it and hanging it and providing the habitat, secure it, but also you have to treat the wood with something or prepare to make another one, because cedar does last, but you know what I'm saying.
And we are nearing the end of our time here, so I just want to say one more time, if we've missed your question or you think of a question after the event, feel free to use that membership@ansp.org to send your question. We will be happy to pass it along, help you get an answer. Also, again, I want to mention, we'll include all of these wonderful resources that both Roger and Chris have provided that kind of give those more details about how to hang it, which plan to use for your specific location and things like that. So we'll make sure you get that. Before we leave though, I think, Roger, when we met earlier in the week, you had this wonderful idea of, this is such a fun family thing to do, to build a bat house or to build a bee hotel and put it out, and then, kind of witness what comes, what do we find in our outdoor spaces after we've hung this up. Any comments from you about how someone could get started through the winter by building something and then putting it out in the spring?
Oh, sure. Like I said, some of the plans, online are incredibly simple. Like I said, they range from a plastic 7-Up bottle to using scraps like I did. I love the soda bottle. I think it's one of the most clever things because it's easy, it's simple, and it provides an adequate 2 inches of I'll call it a roof to prevent the rain from blowing in. All you have to do is secure it. And I think that would be a great way to start learning a little bit more about solitary bees. And then when you feel a bit more comfortable with building that, you can, take on a little bit larger and more complex bee hotels like I showed, and what you'll see online. Again, I was totally blown away when I Googled, how do you build a bee hotel? And there are 5,000 websites, and you can spend hours like I did looking at the different designs and just marveling at the intricacy and the creativity of some of the, and a lot of them were kid designs. You don't have to be an adult to do this. I mean, there's plenty of kid-friendly designs that you can build in just a couple of hours, and I was blown away.
Yeah, that's great. I love that soda bottle one as well. If you've already got bottles like that in your home, why not recycle them? Even if you have very young children in your home, they can help with that, and you're teaching them not just, we're putting this out here to help wildlife, but you're recycling too. It's like, lots of great lessons there. And I would say if you do have children in your house who might be interested in this, we have a great event coming up this Saturday at 10 a.m. It's called Small Actions for Kids Protecting Pollinators. It's developed specifically for kids. It's going to be a lot of fun. So I hope if you have children there in your house, you'll register them for that. That's at ansp.org/spark change. And that's where you'll find recordings of our past events, the registrations for the upcoming. But yeah, I think we'll wrap up here. Roger, Chris, any last words of advice from you?
Go ahead, Roger. I'm just very honored to be part of this. We grew up in your museum, and so did our children. And when they had their birthdays, or when they got a special day with the parents, that's where we took them. What do you want for your birthday? Oh, a special day with Dad at the Academy of Natural Science. So we are grateful for the leadership that you bring to the whole city, and I consider you guys like the jewel of the museum system, actually. So I'm honored to be part of this, and I'm grateful for all the work you do. So thank you for having us.
Thank you for saying that, and thank you for being here.
It's like two great organizations in one. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd like to thank Chris for bringing so much incredible information and things that I had never known about bats. And although I marveled at them, they fly around our house here, but I learned an awful lot about bats. And I think maybe I'll be building a bat house or two over the winter.
I like it.
But,
Send us the pictures. We'll put that on our blog.
That sounds great. Yeah.
But thank you, Chris, and to Katie and everybody for the invite. This was a great event, and there were a lot of really, really interesting questions.
Yes. Thank you all for coming and for asking these questions. I can tell people are really curious about this. Like I said, use us as a resource. Use that email to ask us questions. And we will send that recording tomorrow. You'll get it directly from my email address, so you can feel free to reply and ask me questions if you want. I'm not going to answer them, but I'll direct them to the right people. So yeah, thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Roger.
Thank you.
And hopefully we see you all again soon.